Welcome, everyone. This is our breakout session on future trends shaping transportation. I'm Mary Long, the Managing Director of our Supply Chain Forum. And with me today is my colleague, Dr. Mary Holcomb, and we're going to go through this with you together. So we've got some opening slides. There we go. Rule number one, be able to advance your slides. So we will go through an overview of the white paper, talk about sector highlights, and hit the VUCA framework, cameras, and talk in detail about the 5 trends shaping transportation. So this is the summary slide that shows all 5 themes on the same slide. Mary will take us through each one of these in more detail, and then we have polling questions associated with them to get some feedback and engagement with you all as well. So I'm not going to go and list each one of them, but then I also wanted to draw attention to, we've had many partners in this process. One huge shout out to Ryder for sponsoring the white paper. And then we also brought in industry experts to help us with sector highlights. And so we have some of these folks on the phone, and in true academic fashion, Mary's going to call on some and I'm going to call on some. And so we'll make that interactive as well. And then we do have a framework in the deck regarding VUCA. This is a term that we have used within the paper, and it helps to put a context around the environment that we're in right now. So I think that I'm going to do a quick intro on VUCA first, and then hand it off to Mary. So for this section, this is something that normally when I've done this with different companies, you know, we have a lot more time to ease into it and then discuss it together. One way to try to do that in a shorthand fashion without making this the focus of our session is just to quickly do a pulse check with you all to find out how much this resonates with your current experience. So you see what these terms are: the speed of change, of volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, uncertainty around current and future states, complex, having many things that are critical to get accomplished, and they're all interconnected and you have to make decisions. And then ambiguous, you know, it's unclear and it's difficult to interpret it because of all these signals. So what I'd like to do now is launch a poll asking you how effectively you operate in a VUCA environment. So you've had like 2 minutes to warm up. So welcome to all of you. And to engage right away, I would love for you to go to answer this and just give us some feedback. You know, if you were rating yourselves on a scale of 1 to 10, with 8 would be hopefully the scale that you are using is 1, you would not be very effective, and 10 would be you're knocking it out of the park. So I'm gonna let this populate for a little bit. And Hannah, can everyone see the poll, or do I have to share it, or it's visible?
You'll have to hit share results. So you'll hit end polling.
Oh, end polling, got it. Thank you. All right, I'll give it 3, 2, 1. All right, here you go. Then these are the results of the poll. And so Mary, you can help me walk through this as well. Really, we've got the majority of folks, 36% are in the 5 range on a 1 to 10 scale. And we have a lot of, we've got then the balance are above that. They're in the 6 to 10, with it spread from 9%, 18% at the 7 and 8 range, and then 9% on the 9 and 10. So are you surprised that people feel really comfortable in a VUCA environment?
You know, what I would say is that one of the things that I think that companies are learning is that they're really pretty adept at learning on the fly. I mean, by the time, you know, we're 7 months into COVID-19 now, and I think for all of its kind of unparalleled and unique circumstances, I think so many companies are really proud of just the teams and how they pull together and how they've been able to, I said, just really, you know, come up with some innovative solutions and things and lessons learned that I think that they're going to carry forward. So not surprising that we have the biggest group there in the middle, and it's very encouraging to see the others that are really, as I said, I think now really putting those lessons learned into place while we're still really in the midst of COVID-19.
Right. Right. I think this highlights the whole, you know, out of any crisis, there's opportunity, and supply chain really stepped up during all of this to lean into their practices. Still, a lot of companies acknowledging they have room. You know, even in that environment, you still have 36% saying we're middle of the road on being able to operate in this. So then let's see. This is more, I'm not going to go into this in detail. It's too much content for us to dig into each one. But basically in this section, what I wanted to give you were some highlights from what is in the paper. And really this is to encourage you to go and download the paper and spend time with it. And certainly Mary and I, Alan is our third author on this. We are available if you have questions regarding any of this. So now I'm going to shift over to Mary, and you just let me know when you want to advance slides, and we'll go from here.
All right, thanks, Mary. Well, hello, everyone. You know, one of the things that we thought to introduce this about looking at the future trends and or looking at trends in transportation for the future, one of the things that we always like to ask to kind of start that conversation was not only how you're dealing with a lot of this ambiguity and just uncertainty that we find in the environment now, but is asking this question that's really pretty thought-provoking if you, you know, once it's posed to you, and that's what keeps you up at night. Now, if you look at this list of three, the cost to serve, and that's particularly related to distribution, changing customer requirements, this whole idea of demand uncertainty, and then last but not least, integration of supply chain technology and really how they're integrated in supply chain processes. It's not a surprise if I tell you that this list was created before we were into what I consider to be really the understanding of really the global pandemic and what it meant that it wasn't going to be over in a very short time. But yet one of the things that I think that we believe in terms of, you know, this paper and looking at what's going to happen, you know, beyond COVID-19 is that these issues are still going to be relevant. And I think that they're still going to be at the top. And you'll find that of the five, you know, kind of themes that came out of our research, that you'll find that these are kind of underlying those five as well. What I would say is that in some cases, we found that the pandemic has really intensified the concerns. It's more critical than ever now to have end-to-end supply chain visibility of product. Many consumers have increased their shopping via e-commerce, and the cost of serving this particular channel continues to really not only tax the available capacity, but it's also in terms of that's putting pressure on the prices themselves. And I don't know how many of us haven't picked up one of the morning papers, whether it's the Wall Street Journal or other periodicals. And what we're finding is either FedEx or UPS or someone else is talking about a holiday surcharge. And so when we go to the EACHs, it can get quite expensive then in terms of that distribution itself. So as I said, I think we'd find these three concerns on a list today, not only just given our current environment, they appeared consistently over the last 3 years of some research that I've been involved in. And it's hard to believe, Mary, but it's an annual study that we've done for 29 years now. And these three have populated that top, you know, list over time. So now let's start the conversation specifically about those five central themes that emerged from our research about those future trends that are going to impact transportation. And I'm excited today, just like Mary had pointed out, that we have our subject matter experts that contributed to the report with us. And so I've got questions or things that I would hope will kind of direct the conversations around some of these, and looking forward to those comments as we go along. I can see some people, so Hannah, you'll have to help me to make sure that everybody that is on my list is going to be here. But the first one we have is related to technology, and I'll have to do a disclaimer here. What I will say is that we did not specifically, they're not in any particular order. So it's not that you must do technology first, and then we have to look at talent or anything of that nature. We just presented them, I think, in a fashion in terms of maybe some organic manner of ranking. Would you say that's true, Mary, perhaps, in terms of that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so let's think about transportation for a minute. I think that I always think about it from this kind of academic perspective and the big scope of things. And we all know that transportation systems make it possible for supply chains to operate at every level. I mean, it really is, to say that transportation is in the driver's seat in terms of supply chain would not be too much of an understatement itself. So at the global, the regional, or even the local level, transportation is the one that ensures this availability of product. Now, at a company level, it gets a lot more real. Transportation's often viewed as kind of this competitive advantage, and it really is an enabler of us building that differential between ourselves and our competitors itself. Now, that's all well and said, and it's very good, but where we start having the challenge is when we know that transportation represents the largest percentage of logistics costs. And so we have to be very mindful, and we have to be aware of the fact that we have to leverage that spend, because it absolutely matters. Now, we've said before, supply chains compete against supply chains. So it's essential that we have these smooth handoffs between nodes and hubs when that occurs. And it's even more than just the physical handoff itself. We all know that of the flows that occur in the supply chain, that technology enables not only that physical flow, but it enables information flow, and it enables the financials. And if you can see my hands, you know that the last two, information in the financial side, those are two-way flows that happen. And as we said, the better we handle those handoffs, the larger the differential we can create between our supply chain and our competitor supply chain. One of the things that we looked at in this paper was this integration of transportation systems with other supply chain technology and systems. And we know that the higher the level of integration, that we're going to see those as a key enabler of how we're able to transform what we see, how we proactively manage, and how we really control that as well. So this is a good time to go to another one of those polling questions, because we'd like to get your input on what you see are some of the biggest barriers to integrating transportation with other business systems. So if you see that one, if you would help us participate in that, and we'll talk about the results once they're in.
We're getting some good responses. So 3, 2, 1. There we go. We're making you respond quick. There. So Mary, can you?
I can. And you know what? I will have to say that I'm not at all surprised by these results. They really parallel what we saw in the larger study that we did for 2020 in terms of those barriers themselves. It really is this alignment that we see, and I'll speak to this at a little bit later in one of our other themes. It seems like technology, whether it's the software or the hardware side of what we do, is really one of those things that it's as necessary as perhaps the oxygen that we breathe in terms of the company and their ecosystem, and really how they're able to, as I said, be competitive and actually improve their performance. So at 53%, as I said, not surprising there. We had 26% that said lack of collaboration. I'm afraid it really is still true, Mary, that what we're seeing is that there's still a lot of silos that exist in organizations. And it's not that that expertise is bad. We absolutely need that depth of knowledge and the things that they do. But sometimes if we're not careful, it can weaken the ability across those different functional areas to be able to collaborate. And as it comes to systems, it can be even harder, I think, to understand how they need to connect, the data that they need to share, and internally and even externally about what we share with partners. We worry about things like security and other factors.
Right. It's encouraging to see that insufficient talent and training at 5% isn't high on this list of the barriers that they've got. And then the change management challenge is at 16. So I will stop share on that.
Now, Mary, we have a follow-up question to this one as well. It's kind of like a double jeopardy in terms of polling questions, because once we look at these barriers, we wanted to go a little bit deeper. And part of what we wanted to look at is really what do we think is the predominant underlying issue to this lack of integration. So once again, if you would respond to this, and we'll talk about the results once we get them in.
It is always fascinating to see how quickly people jump on, okay, this is definitely my issue. So, all right. You all are doing really great at these polls. I have to say, you're the quickest group so far I've seen embrace this. So 3, 2, 1, there we go. Here the polls say.
And Mary, now we kind of have a split at the top in terms of what's contributing to that underlying issue. And so we have two. One that's edging out the other for first place is that lack of cross-functional understanding at 29%. And then the company's organizational structure at 24%. And then that one also goes directly with, perhaps people today don't manage transportation directly. It may be outsourced totally. And so, just the integration of that could not be, would not be something necessarily that's mainstream to their business systems, although I would, suggest, and it possibly is in place and probably, that they do get the information and the connectivity that they need there for visibility. From our annual study, part of what was revealed in that was that corporate or if we look at that organizational structure, is part of that number one barrier. So if we're able, or we are ever going to be able to reach that desired state of supply chain digitalization, this lack of understanding, whether it's cross-functional or whether it's about the technologies themselves and their impact. I was reminded once when I had an executive tell me that as it related to supply chain, logistics, and transportation, that they never realized when they came into that role that the biggest responsibility that they had was educating others in the organization about the value that they bring to the table. Their assumption was that if it wasn't going wrong, everybody would assume we're doing a great job. And yet that ended up in terms of just constantly having that message, particularly at that leadership level and others, about what we do and why it's going as well as it is. And of course, those of us behind the scenes realize that if it's going that smoothly, there's a lot of work that's being done. There's a lot of technology, coordination, and synchronization that's in place as well. One of the other things that we found that wasn't, a part of this list that we thought was interesting was this resistance to change. And the fact that so many companies, because Wall Street and a lot of our share and stockholders really put an emphasis on short-term performance, what we found is that they focus on these incremental changes rather than transformational change. Transformational change is really a part of, what I think in many organizations is led by the leadership. In many cases, when the leadership is turning over, it's hard to have some continuity there of what's going on. And that was related as one of the significant barriers to constraints. Now we have a slide next that talks about specifically about transportation management technology. Now this is a good news and bad news slide, isn't it, Mary? Because if we look at it, this is the glass half full or glass half empty. And I'm going to start on the half empty side, although I consider myself to be a little bit of what I would think would be kind of a positive outlook itself. And that is that if I look at the current technologies are not fully utilized and add that to the unrealized, and they really have a lot of room for improvement, that's a little more than 0.25% of the companies that we talk to there. And so if that's the case, then if we look at companies that say that they're fully utilizing it, it's almost 1/4 as well. And so I see those two as really kind of opposite ends of the spectrum, with the other two in between, which really is the bulk of the companies that are out there. It reminds me a lot in terms of the tools that I use in the classroom or other technologies. There's always room for improvement as I'm adding more and more. I think this will speak a bit more directly when we get to the talent part or the theme about how this constant, I think, learning and training and identifying, what's going to happen in the future in terms of transportation is important to not only utilizing the technology, but other things else. So if you think about this technology, there are a lot of other things in terms of just a TMS or yard management systems. There are things now that are coming up like telematics that would allow drivers and dispatchers to have data in real time and they can act on that information. It really has advanced one of our other themes, which is that last yard delivery itself. Because think about it, one of the biggest cost drivers is this downtime for any of our drivers. Now I'm going to shift a little bit, and I noticed that Ben Sharp from the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, the BNSF, is online with us. And Ben, I really wanted to kind of get your input or some thoughts on, how are the railroads responding to this need for better technology and really the integration of that technology across your vast operating system?
Sure, Mary, can you hear me okay?
I most certainly can.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I would say there's a whole gamut of fronts in the way that we're responding to it from a technological perspective. I mean, I'll start here in my new role in our network operations center. It's sort of like NASA here in Fort Worth, but it's where we dispatch about 90% of the railroad from, and we've got a new technology in conjunction with a company, Wabtec, that will actually help our dispatchers plan more effective train meets. So to your point, minimizing that downtime, any downtime for us is bad too, right? Whether that's cars in terminals dwelling, whether that's trains dwelling online, things like that. Time is the enemy in the transportation business, and we certainly feel that too. So that's one item of technology. Another big one actually involves our locomotives and the efficiencies that we can gain there. Now we have the ability to put locomotives at multiple places throughout a train without another engineer located on it. So we can have locomotives at 3 different places in the train, front, middle, and the rear end, and still be able to control all of it with one person on the front end. And that gains us a lot of efficiencies in terms of just overall train length and what we can get. So now we're running trains up to 16,000 feet long, or they're basically a little over 3 miles.
Wow, that would be something to see. So Ben, as we say, there is not an industry or a transportation provider that's out there that's not impacted by this need for technology integration. So thanks for those comments and insights. So Mary, I think now we're ready to go on to our second element here, or a second theme that emerged, and that was on design. The kind of the problem and the challenge with a breakout session like this is that we could spend an entire session talking about just one of these if we wanted to. But here, when we talk about the design of the supply chain, I'm going to give you a data factoid that I think is just fascinating, that when I start talking about design and why it's going to be important now and in the future, because we have this component that says the design of your supply chain determines 80% of its cost. And so if you look at execution, that would come through perhaps an advanced planning system or an MRP or any of those other systems, you're really only trying to optimize or manage that 20% of the cost, and that's not nearly enough. So not only are supply chains disruptions one of those compelling events, and I'd take COVID-19 probably out of that picture, but I would say other disruptions that we've had over the past few years. And it has compelled a lot of companies to look at their networks and evaluate the risk. We've added complexity and uncertainty. In fact, Mary led the conversation when we first started about the VUCA model and about how we can use that framework to assess that. But what's happening in our geopolitical relationships is the fact that it's impacted our 10-year growth trend in world trade and GDP. In fact, as I said, it's that motivation for companies to rethink the structure of their supply chains from global to local. And that's going to be one of our themes in a bit. So one of the things that we've talked about in terms of those themes is really what happens in terms of when we see this shift from global perhaps to more of what I would consider to be regional. And then from there, as we look at supply chains and the local side. But Jim Newsom, I know that you're here with us from the port of Charleston. We're so excited to have you here, and kind of how I want to tee this up to you. And in fact, there's along with the one from the rail side from Ben Sharp, Jim also contributed a really, I think all of these contributions in terms of like case studies and things from that, if I look at the container shipping and the challenges that are facing them, and nowhere would you find the impact of global to regional and the impact that it's been to shipping. And particularly, they've been that foundation for connecting what I consider to be global supply chains. In the last year, Jim, your sector has really seen and really faced a lot of challenges. And you talk about 3 of those in that section in terms of your contribution to this paper. What would you say has been one of the most critical issues that container shipping's got to face in the future?
Well, thanks, Mary, for having me. And I mean, we certainly have heard all of the information about supply chains being reshored and that there'd be less reliance on Asian production, which has kind of been the staple of growth in container shipping for, really the last 20 years. And then obviously we were hit with a pandemic and we didn't really know what would happen in terms of demand and what that would look like. I think nothing could really be further from the truth. I mean, China has responded more quickly than any other country in terms of economic recovery. We're probably sourcing as much as we ever have really from China today. And what we've learned is in the pandemic that while volumes were down, shortly after the Western world shut down, that when we can't go to movie theaters and restaurants and football games, we sit home and buy stuff on e-commerce basically. So right now we're seeing record volumes in the container shipping sector to the U.S. and obviously by extension to the ports. I don't think anybody planned on that really. It's a pleasant surprise on the one hand. But what we also saw was a shift in cargo to the West Coast of the United States for ostensibly faster transit times, so they could get the cargo quicker, but that hasn't necessarily materialized. It's one thing to get cargo to a port fast. The other challenge is to get it out of the port fast and get it on to where it needs to go. And there are a lot of issues there. So I think we're seeing a longer term stability in container shipping now. Container shipping's always been this roller coaster type of industry that, made money one year and lost money for 3 years and overbuilt ships and then cut prices to fill the ships. And the lines have kind of figured out how to control that now by blanking sailings. We had 70 blank sailings this year when volume was down, basically. And in that way, although their volume was down, the container shipping industry will make record profits this year. So I think it's a more stable time in the container shipping industry, which on the one hand is good. But I think on the other hand, if you're a shipper on this call, rates are at record levels today in container shipping, and I don't think anybody's predicting for them to really go down. I think the lines have mastered the supply-demand balance equation. What does that do for us as a port? I mean, I think obviously short-term disruptions in demand don't really impact us. We're probably the most perfect example of a long cycle business. We build 50-year assets, and we've had to invest a lot, not only to account for anticipated growth, but account for the deployment of big container ships, which no one in our industry ever saw how that would materialize to the size they are today. The good news is they're about as big as they're going to get. And I think the ports have to continue to sort of play a pivotal role in the supply chain to be reliable, where people don't have to worry about whether they can get their cargo in and out reliably, which hasn't always been the case in the United States. So that's what we're really focused on, is and some people take exception to it, I say kind of being a silent partner in the supply chain, where if a Walmart or an Amazon is using our port, they don't really have to worry about, whether we can perform well. So it's been a surprising year. As I said, volumes have gone up more than anyone anticipated. I think we don't know. The short-term future is less clear. A lot of projections are that the major retailers, particularly with their e-commerce capability, will continue to grow, potentially at the expense of the more specialty retailers.
Thanks, Jim, for those comments. And in fact, Mary, we didn't plan it, but I think it's kind of neat that we start out in terms of, looking at the container shipping and the ports and then the railroads. And really, I think just the major ways in which they move so much volume in terms of us. And Jim, as you pointed out, in terms of, once we move to these other things that we're talking about, how those volumes get smaller, and it is that disbursement of that. I just saw today that Amazon is planning for 1,000 small delivery hubs, and how this will affect the design. But as you said, a lot of those products don't necessarily originate here within North America. And so we have, the ports and container shipping are a vital part of what we do. And retailers even are updating and expanding their distribution footprint as well. And if we talked about this company here in terms of the high school kids and their startups, in terms of things that are going on, all of these things, as we see, as these add to this localized nature, are really going to be important. So the next thing we're going to talk about is this e-commerce, and it's our third theme. If you'll notice that, through several of these, they're just kind of overlapping or interrelated themes. We talk about this one as being the last mile and that focus. There's been a lot of emphasis currently on last mile, but Mary, it's really all about that last yard now, isn't it? So Let me just tee this up in terms of what that last yard's about. It's really an array of options, and I'll bet that most of you on the call today have taken advantage of some of those in the last 7 months. So it's going to include perhaps autonomous, and we'll use another word like contactless as well. Delivery at the curbside could be that it's going to go on our trunk in terms of delivery. It might be coming to our doorstep. We feel that it's not going to diminish all that much after we get through COVID or we're into another new normal, because we think consumers are really getting accustomed to this way of delivery. And actually our ability to customize it is pretty involved as well. It's going to involve more tracking and location. And if we're talking about a B2B segment, the business to business, I think we're also going to be concerned about the condition of the product. So the ability to know what the temperature was while it was even in that last yard in terms of delivery, as it relates to things we know we're moving into this next critical phase, which might be delivery of vaccines and other things that are very sensitive to the temperature itself. So e-commerce is placing a lot of pressures on companies to meet these shorter and shorter delivery time windows just to remain competitive. So Mary, I don't know if you want to do the polling question next, or if you want to do some of our subject matter expert input here, or how should we proceed with this one?
I think let's go with the polling question super quick. And this is an easy true false. Consumer requirements for faster order fulfillment. has your company rethinking how your supply chain is designed? Okay, we
Not-
have, yeah. This is a clear winner, as they say, winner, winner.
100% true or mostly true. And you know what? I think we're part of that action itself. I know how frustrating it can be. And I've noticed that even on e-commerce now, as the capacity gets tighter, that those delivery times are getting longer because of that lack of, as someone told me, of just seats in the truck. And I think it's probably, as you know, others would say, that it's not just trucking. We're seeing kind of this, capacity, tightness happen across lots of different modes.
Okay. And I am going to I do have this next slide just is shows in a visual format some of the things that Mary has talked about with the autonomous delivery, being able to go out to curbside and pick up. A little shift from this B2C piece. There in our paper in the sector highlights, Michelle Hofferstenen, I don't know, Wally, if you're on, but Michelle, if you wouldn't mind coming on, it would be great to have you comment regarding the logistics collaboration that enables this kind of agile response. But if you are not able to come on, then we can save that too for, as Mary's mentioned, these overlap, and we can talk agility at the end as well.
Hi, Mary, I'm here.
Okay, yay. Hi, Michelle. So if you could just, similar to, when we've touched base with others, if you could talk to us about the section on logistics collaboration. It's not exactly related to this last yard piece, but in the B2B space, talk to us about some of the key highlights that you brought out for us to consider.
Sure. Yes, you'll never see us actually doing the last yard delivery, although I think that that's very important. So where HACCP plays, and again, we're representing freight forwarders here. For those that aren't familiar, air freight forwarders kind of act like a 3PL model that we work with airlines, trucking partners to move things via air freight. Because as you know, there's got to be a truck portion on the beginning and end, and one or more air segments in between. So as far as e-commerce, what we're doing a lot is the middle mile. So the kind of behind the scenes, and the case study that we talked about, Wally Devereaux, who's head of Southwest Airlines cargo division, and our companies have worked together for over 30 years. And what we've learned to do is zone skipping. We did it, and it's getting used now in e-commerce. So everybody, tends to think about FedEx and UPS, a lot of Amazon, the major players in this, but how do other people move some of their freight? And what it is really, then you use the airlines, and we use commercial airlines like Southwest as a partner to actually move e-commerce freight in the belly of their airplanes. So that becomes an interesting model and a really effective model, because in normal times, there are many, many flights to choose from. So you don't have to worry about the one time a day, you've got to hit this one cargo flight schedule to hit. So we can use a variety of schedules. And I think that offers flexibilities to customers. And again, when you look at what the airlines are doing, even though their flight capacity has been cut, they've still been very creative and very focused on keeping that cargo business going so that we can push really huge amounts of freight through their system. I think, as others have mentioned and talked about, I see in your report, you talked about agility and speed is kind of it for transportation. We've always looked at it very similar, but speed's kind of the given, but really reliability, yet flexibility. You can plan and have a great plan, but you got to be able to change at a minute's notice. A flight gets canceled, delayed, airport traffic control, whatever it may be. But I think reliability is just as important. Just getting something there the fastest is not always the answer, because if it's really time definite in when the next partner is ready to take the handoff, getting early isn't always a good thing either. It's really got to be very time definite. So I think that's one of the lessons we've learned over time with the e-commerce and just the working with airlines in general.
That is an interesting insight and such a hard thing for transportation to, as a whole, to accomplish. So it's interesting to hear specific examples. Thank you. That was great. You know, Mary and I were super excited about all of these sections. So Mary, I think I'm going to move you on to, we'll go to the next one.
And we have another polling question, Mary. And as I said, so many of these things, you know, just a little bit deeper insight in terms of asking for your input and insights on these. And this one, this question has a few more, you know, a little bit longer answers, so it might take you a little bit longer, but we want to know a little bit more about how your company is adapting to this increasing e-commerce growth. And so we have several options here for you to consider, including we're not making any changes.
So far, there are no takers for we are not making any changes. So not to put any pressure on y'all answering, but you know, I'm very glad to see that. So we'll give it 3, 2. Ooh, lots of, okay, here we go. Ah, someone.
You know,
Someone-
Mary, because we are the academics that we are, and I just finished a discussion with our MBA class about this whole concept of the omni-channel and really the, you know, the distribution network and the design and how, you know, even the brick and mortar locations now are looking at doing order fulfillment, and it fits very nicely into that last yard in terms of being able to do a number of things. But that omni-channel, I'm old enough, Mary, to just remember still when a lot of companies, when we were new to this e-commerce thing, that they would, you know, and they're talking about the business to consumer, would have separate distribution centers. And, you know, in terms of those channels themselves, and they would have inventory that would be dedicated specifically to that. And then we realized that, you know, there are probably a lot more benefits to moving to this omni thing, where we have this shared inventories to take care of those customer bases. It has transportation benefits. We know that from the inventory, and particularly that demand uncertainty, that it can help in some of the areas like that. And certainly the velocity of the inventory can help in many ways, and perhaps increase that product availability. So that 37% that said that they're more fully embracing omnichannel is really very good to see. And then the other thing in terms of transportation and a big impact, and we are certainly seeing that happen, and that's more premium or dedicated methods of transportation. Not only does that secure the capacity in many cases if we're looking at dedicated, but the premium modes, because we know that, as Michelle said, it's not only just the faster, but it also is the condition, it's the reliability of those moves, the consistency. In some cases, it could be the technology that allows us to do the track and the trace. Now, even though I may not need to know when that package, and I'll just use a brand here from Pottery Barn's going to arrive, it's not a critical thing. It's kind of really one of those other things, having that notice that said it was delivered, particularly if I'm out of town and need to ask a neighbor to scoop up that package or something and hold it. Those kinds of things, as we start looking at, you know, the premium transportation are ways, not that that's necessarily a premium choice, but we find in terms of the carriers, it's really a broad array of offerings that they have, including the technology that they have. The third one on here, and the list gets pretty fragmented after this, don't you think, Mary, in terms of innovative technologies that they might use, like drones, autonomous vehicles at 11%. And then the other one was the use of more 3PLs with e-commerce experience. In the annual study that I've referenced a couple of times now, this is one that we saw growing as well. A lot of companies realize we have to have a presence on the internet and on the web, and that they realize that transitioning to that e-commerce or to that on the channel was not something that they had a lot of expertise in. And nor did they feel like they wanted to add those people. And so bringing on board a 3PL, and I know the 3PL study that John Langley does and has done for a number of years, then they also saw that value add through 3PLs was something that was expanding. So I think we're ready now to talk about our fourth theme, as I'm looking at the clock, and I'm hoping we're going to have at least a couple of minutes to get some questions in from the audience that's here, is to talk about this whole idea of talent.
Oh, me. There we go.
Oh, thank you. I think this title, as much as any of them, really, I think is a great summation of this, tomorrow's workforce. And I think that so many companies, I know in my little town, I live right outside of Knoxville here where the university is. And one of the things that we're seeing is almost everybody, if it's on the service side, has a help wanted. I even know that on the transportation side that, you know, one of the things about the economy and the shortage of drivers, that one would say that that's been able to help that. But what we're still finding as it relates to perhaps the e-commerce or that last mile and last yard delivery is that we're still experiencing shortages, because what we're requiring of the workforce for tomorrow, particularly in transportation, is going to be very, very different. Understanding the change management portion and how it relates to that talent side and how they're going to be a part of transforming transportation. So if we think about the use of like technology, and we're thinking about things like telematics and how it's going to help drivers do things like, you know, help them with automated administrative and compliance reporting, and the fact that they may have communications, it's going to take over and hopefully many of the tasks. And that's going to help improve perhaps the quality of life for all of our transportation operators in many ways. And I thought Ben's comment about, you know, having the 3 engineers, and Ben, I can still remember those tough negotiations in terms of reducing the crew, you know, and what that meant, and in terms of how it continues to evolve, and where at some point in time, even for those operators, we stepped it up and we said, you know what, having, you know, an associate's degree is a really good thing. And so it's not so much the formal education, but it's that continuous learning, whether it's in-house that we provide or what they seek on their own in terms of certification. We certainly are, because what we're seeing is that we have this evolution of business roles that's critical to what we want to achieve in this area. So Mary, if you'll go to that next slide. Ben, I don't know if you quickly wanted to add anything in terms of what you're seeing, just even at that operational level in terms of just the train crew itself.
Right. So, I mean, you're right. Lots of tough labor negotiations have taken place really over the course of the last, gosh, we'll call it 35 years. You know, the 1985 crew consist agreement that took us from 5 to 3, 92 took us from 3 to 2. And then now we're actually in the middle of a collective or national bargaining agreement to go down to 1 for 1 locomotive engineer only in the cab of the locomotive. So that's kind of ongoing negotiations. We'll see where that does or doesn't go. But anyway, some of that technology has allowed us to get there. Positive train control in order to keep trains from basically being able to run signals and what have you. So that's that. And would say the other aspect from a talent or really just from a people availability standpoint that we are seeing an impact of right now is, you know, because of the stimulus checks, it's getting hard to get people to come to the hubs to work, to be able to ramp and deramp, load and unload containers and trailers off of trains. And that's one of our constraints now with our contractors, is just getting people in to do that. You know, we realize that there's the squeeze. You know, we're seeing about a 6% drop in over the road truckers. I would tell you, we too are struggling to get people into work at the hubs. You know, when most of our hubs anyway are located near other distribution centers that offer competitive wages inside warehouses and things like that, where people can go inside and work. And so we're having to explore other alternatives in terms of technology and wages and things like that to make sure that we get people at the hubs.
Absolutely, and I'm hearing that from really a number of sectors in transportation. Mary, I know we'd had a polling question planned for this, but if we're looking at the clock, I think just in the essence of time, that we'll move through that polling question, and we'll talk about our last theme that emerged from the study, which is on agility. Now, Michelle, I'm really with you in terms of agility. I think now it's been one dissertation And if you look at the whole idea of supply chain resilience, which has been a part of agility, another dissertation, one in the College of Engineering on agility as well. And so this is a topic that I think we continue to explore, and it's represented in our future trends. And I think that it is going to continue to be important in the future. Now, I love this quote. It's not that I'm such a big hockey fan, but I loved what Wayne Gretzky said. He said, "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been." And that's the whole essence of agility. And so even football analogies here, the best defensive players tend to not go to where the action is, but they want to go where they see that ball going and where they're going to have that impact. And so that's where we're seeing in terms of using that data and information, become more nimble, to be more responsive. Michelle, I think you talked about being flexible, all of those things that are going to allow us that quickness. Now, whether that's using information in the cognitive sense or whether that's designing supply chains, Jim, like you talked about, once again, that agility is moving that product through the ports as it comes in, the volumes that make it very possible for us to be, you know, in a global marketplace, to be competitive and to provide consumers with things that that we want to do. But it's not an easy thing to do, however. And so, Mary, I think this next slide more than anything supports that. For me, this is always kind of a startling kind of a fact to see about how many SKUs and how much growth in items that we're adding to just the portfolio of things that we offer. This whole idea of product proliferation. If we look at active items, sales and sales items, so all of those initiatives, all of those promotions that since 2010 we said is, you know, contributed to almost a 300% growth in cumulative items. Now, I would say that we're taking a breather right now. I've talked to several consumer packaged goods companies that tell me that they are able to be the voice of reason in the meetings now, and that there's been some focus on the key and strategic items. But they said, don't be fooled, that as soon as we see some light at the end of the tunnel in terms of, you know, what's going to happen after, you know, we are better managing the COVID-19, is that marketing is going to be back with even more promotions, even more new items and other things to get a hold of that. But hopefully we'll take a few of these lessons learned with us into that environment as we move into the future. So Mary, I think we're going to end this in terms of just talking about the 5 themes overall with one last polling question, if you would provide some insight for us on this.
This one was one of those where it took a little bit longer to read. So y'all,
yeah.
We're getting answers now. I'm going to give it a minute. Like, well, not even a minute.
I'm pleasantly just not surprised, but it's always interesting to see, you know, how people really are coalescing around a couple of central themes. And I think that that's just kind of reflecting once again, just the commonality of just the challenges we're all facing. So the results are in. Looks like 58% of you say that respond faster when conditions are rapidly changing. That is more, I would say, I'm hearing that in Mary and others of you that are out there, we hear this all the time in conversations that we're having, is that this agility is going to be critical as we move forward. Because, and I'll close this the way I started, Mary, those 3 things that were the top of the list and what keeps you awake at night. If you recall, it was that uncertainty, that volatility that was in the marketplace, even before we had to deal with a global pandemic. It's really only made the situation much more dire in terms of that response. And so we're seeing that reflected here. And then after that, we have just really splintered responses across reduce the overall complexity of the supply chain, which I briefly mentioned, operational decisions at the lowest management level possible. You can't make quick decisions if it goes through that normal monthly cycle of S&OP, or if you have to take it through all of those. And I had a company tell me that they're trying to push the decision-making down to the lowest level possible and empower particularly frontline employees to make great decisions if they have visibility and if they also have data and information to make those great decisions from. Now, Mary, I think we have our graphic of the 5 themes, and I just absolutely love this. And, you know, guys, I apologize for this whirlwind tour through. I think I just increased even my own talking speed today. These are obviously topics that all of us, including our subject matter experts that contributed to the white paper, and Alan Emling, I know, is on the call today, and Alan is just a critical part of making sure, along with all of the rest of you, that this was just I think, a just excellent white paper. And so, Mary, I'm going to turn it back over to you to bring it home for us.
Well, we probably have time for 1 or 2 questions. I know it's hard to just switch from the polling to engaged chat super quickly, but if you've got a question, feel free to put them in chat. Or since there's, you know, a group of us, and you probably by now, we all have fairly decent Zoom skills, and you can feel free to come off mic and ask your question and go back on. But I'm not seeing anyone pop off and want to do that. So Mary, what I would ask you is, you know, this paper, we focused on where is it going? What are the trends impacting transportation? You know, that kind of naturally leads to where, like, are there specific areas that you think will be easier to accelerate against? So when you look at these trends that we covered and the things we talked about today, technology, there was a section of this paper where I remember reading back in 2017, you had encouraged companies to take a look at APIs and integrating those, especially into transportation. And so there are many highlights in this paper, a lot of detail, 40 pages for you all out there. Would you have something that you think would be the area you place the bet on really accelerating?
Do you know, Mary, it's a great question, and I'll try to be fairly concise in my answer. If we laid out a roadmap like this, or the 5 themes, we wouldn't leave the presentation without somebody saying, where do we start? We said there were no particular order, and this is what my personal kind of bias is. And that is that 80% of the cost and what we can manage, control, and design, I think we have to start there. And so Jim Newsom, I think you were definitely on track when you talked about, you know, this flow. We have to look at an end-to-end supply chain. We have to look at where we're sourcing goods from and ultimately how they get to consumers. We've got to get control of that 80%. Now, a part of how we get there is through technology. So we have to have that integration. And you know what? Those 2 things are going to enable us to have a larger and a more profitable presence in e-commerce. It's going to make us more agile. But you know what? At the heart of it, we've got process, we've got technology, but the 3rd leg on that stool is people. And so for me, when we were working on this paper, it all came together. And so we have to make sure that it flows as smoothly as possible in terms of those handoffs from one end to the other with all of the modes of transportation, having that synchronization and working together effectively.
Yeah, that is a great summary. I think it brings it all together. I'm not sure we could end on anything better than that. So this session will be posted in our app, and the deck will also be available as well. You know where to find Mary and I, and Alan, if you've got any questions for us. The paper also, you can download it from our website. It is out there. So other than that, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciated having all of you on, and feel free for sure, join us next week for the faculty session on our current research and the Scholars of Distinction Executive Speed Networking. Thanks
so
Mary,
much. A big thank you to Ben, Jim, and Michelle for joining us. I think that was the icing on our cupcake. So thank you guys for taking the time out of your busy schedules.
Mary, thank you so much for doing that. Jim, Michelle, Ben, thank you so much for being here.